From 1958 to 1989, Americans packed into more than 10,000 restaurant locations that no longer exist. They were not shuttered by health codes or bad food. They were killed by corporate mergers, reckless expansion, and an industry that swallowed its own. Here are 30 discontinued restaurants from the 80s that need to come back. Burger Chef was once the second largest burger chain in America, with 1,050 locations at its peak in 1973, nearly as many as McDonald's. The chain invented the kids' meal. They called it the fun meal. It was a box packed with a burger, fries, a toy, and cartoon characters like Count Fangburger and Burgerilla. It launched in 1973, 6 full years before McDonald's Happy Meal existed. When McDonald's copied the idea, Burger Chef sued and lost. General Foods, which had owned the chain since 1968, ran it into the ground through mismanagement and sold everything to Hardee's in 1982 for $44 million. Most locations were gutted and rebranded overnight. The last Burger Chef closed in Cookeville, Tennessee in 1996. If you took a family road trip any time before 1980, you knew Howard Johnson's by its orange roof before you could even read the sign. Hojo's was the largest restaurant chain in America at its height, with more than 1,000 locations from coast to coast, each one promising 28 flavors of ice cream, fried clam strips, and the same dependable meal your parents had ordered at the last one 3 states ago. Howard Deering Johnson built that empire from a single soda fountain in Quincy, Massachusetts, starting in 1925. His son sold it all in 1980 for $630 million. 5 years later, Marriott flipped it for $314 million, barely half the original price, and began converting locations into big boy restaurants and closing the rest. The chain bled out across 3 decades of ownership changes, each one stripping another layer of what made Hojo's worth stopping for. The very last Howard Johnson's restaurant in Lake George, New York, closed in 2022 after 97 years. Before Chuck E. Cheese owned every kid's birthday party in America, there was ShowBiz Pizza Place, and the entertainment was not even close. ShowBiz opened on March 3, 1980, built around a 3-stage animatronic rock band called the Rock of Fire Explosion. Creator Aaron Fechter designed life-sized characters with latex faces capable of real expressions, a bear named Billy Bob, a gorilla named Fats Geronimo, and a wolf called Rolf, performing rock and pop medleys across 3 full stages while kids screamed between slices. When Chuck E. Cheese went bankrupt in 1984, ShowBiz bought them out. Then the new management turned around and gutted ShowBiz instead, stripping every Rock-afire character and forcing Chuck E. Cheese puppets onto the old mechanical bodies in a process called concept unification. By 1992, every ShowBiz location had been converted. The greatest animatronic band ever built was erased so a corporate merger could save on licensing fees. Long before the salad bar became standard at every family steakhouse, Sizzler was already doing it, and doing it better than anyone. Founded in Culver City, California in 1958, the chain's pitch was straightforward, a quality steak dinner at a price just above fast food. By the late 70s, its all-you-can-eat salad bar had turned Sizzler into a household name, and at its peak, the chain operated more than 700 locations across the country. The problem started when the buffet became the main event. Management shifted focus away from the steaks, cut corners on entree quality, and customers noticed. Sizzler filed for bankruptcy in 1996 and shuttered over 130 restaurants. An E. coli outbreak in 2000 at a Milwaukee location sickened more than 100 people and killed one. A second bankruptcy followed during the pandemic in 2020. 74 locations survive today, almost all of them in California, clinging to a nostalgia-based comeback built around the very identity the chain nearly threw away. Chi-Chi's brought Tex-Mex to the Midwest, and turned it into a Friday night tradition for families who had never seen a chimichanga before 1980. Co-founded in 1975 by restaurateur Marno McDermott and former Green Bay Packers player Max McGee, the chain grew to over 210 locations by the mid-90s. The margaritas were enormous. The chips and salsa arrived free the moment you sat down, and the dining room stayed packed from Ohio to Pennsylvania every weekend. Then came the worst food safety disaster in American restaurant history. In October 2003, Chi-Chi's filed for bankruptcy. 1 month later, contaminated green onions imported from Mexico and served raw in the salsa at a location near Pittsburgh triggered a hepatitis A outbreak that sickened 660 people and killed 4, the largest such outbreak the country had ever recorded. Over 9,000 people received emergency immunoglobulin shots. The chain closed its last 65 restaurants by September 2004. Farrell's ice cream parlor was not a restaurant, it was a controlled riot disguised as a birthday party. Founded in Portland, Oregon, in 1963 by Bob Farrell, the chain peaked at 130 locations by 1975. Every parlor was themed after a turn-of-the-century ice cream shop, with servers in period costume, ragtime piano, pounding in the background, and a menu printed like a tabloid newspaper. The main attraction was the zoo, a massive multi-scoop sundae carried through the dining room on a stretcher by sprinting servers, while ambulance sirens blared and the whole restaurant lost its mind. Finish the pig's trough by yourself, and you earned a pin that read, "I made a pig of myself at Farrell's." Marriott bought the chain in 1972, but when Bob Farrell left, the magic left with him. New owners tried replacing the ice cream chaos with salad bars and family dining, and the whole concept collapsed. By 1990, almost every location was gone. If your family wanted steak without the steakhouse bill in the late 60s, you drove to Ponderosa. Named after the ranch on the television show Bonanza, the chain opened in Kokomo, Indiana in 1965 and became the country's largest budget steakhouse, with 700 locations at its peak, pulling in $272 million in annual sales by 1978. Its stock price had climbed from $3 to $84. But the 80s were spent fighting off hostile takeover bids that burned through cash, while the dining rooms aged and menus went stale. Metro Media bought Ponderosa in 1988, then absorbed rival Bonanza the following year, and the combined empire of 1,300 locations proceeded to lose $190 million in its first 5 years. Aging facilities, revolving leadership, and a buffet model that had stopped drawing crowds bled both brands until there was almost nothing left. Roughly 15 Ponderosa locations remain open today, their once packed Saturday night parking lots nearly empty. Steak and Ale changed how Americans ate out. Founded in Dallas in 1966 by Norman Brinker, the man later credited with inventing casual dining, it pioneered the Tudor-style steakhouse with stuffed armchairs, bookshelves on the walls, dim lighting, an unlimited salad bar, and prices that made a good steak feel like a splurge without the bill to match. At its peak, Steak and Ale had 280 locations across the country. The chain shared a parent company with Bennigan's under the S&A Restaurant Corporation umbrella, and when lender GE Capital forced S&A into involuntary Chapter 7 liquidation in August 2008, both chains were destroyed at once. 300 company-owned locations shut down in a single weekend. Employees arrived to locked doors and tape notices. No severance, no warning. The chain that helped invent American casual dining was killed in 48 hours by a bank that wanted its money back. Bennigan's was the Irish pub that somehow landed in every American strip mall, and nobody minded. The first opened in Atlanta in 1976, and the Monte Cristo sandwich alone built a cult following. Dark wood paneling, stained glass, brass fixtures. Every location felt like a neighborhood bar, even when it sat between a dry cleaner and a department store. By the 80s, the chain topped 300 locations and had essentially invented the casual dining happy hour. But Bennigan's shared a corporate parent with Steak and Ale, and when GE Capital pulled the trigger on S&A in 2008, over 150 company-owned Bennigans went dark in one weekend. Roughly 10 survive today. Stubborn holdouts are kept alive by franchisees who refuse to let a bank decide their closing time. Ground Round was the restaurant where your parents let you throw peanut shells on the floor, and that alone was enough to make it sacred. Launched in 1969 as a spin-off of Howard Johnson's, the chain built its reputation on joyful disorder, free popcorn at every table, free peanuts you could crack and scatter across the tile, old silent films flickering on the walls, and a standing rule that any kids' sports team who won their game ate free. 200 locations, packed dining rooms throughout the 80s, with portions large enough and prices low enough that a family of 5 could eat without doing mental math in the parking lot beforehand. Heavy debt from overexpansion eventually caught up, and Ground Round went bankrupt in 2004. The brand sat dormant for 20 years until a couple purchased the rights and opened the first new location in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts in 2025. Shells on the floor, popcorn on the table just like before. But if Ground Round collapsed from growing too fast, Rax Roast Beef fell apart from trying to be too much at once. The chain started as Jack's Roast Beef in Springfield, Ohio in 1967. It got bought and renamed RX, nearly went under in 72, then was rebuilt and rechristened Rax by 77. At its peak, 504 locations in 38 states, it competed head-to-head with Arby's for the roast beef market. Then, management panicked and loaded the menu with everything. Baked potatoes, pasta, fish, cheesesteaks, Mexican food, and an enormous salad bar, all crammed in through the 80s. The brand identity dissolved completely. Customers who showed up for a roast beef sandwich found themselves staring at a menu the size of a phone book. A handful of locations survive in Ohio, still selling the original sandwich to customers who remember when that was the only thing worth ordering. Victoria Station seated you inside a train, literally. The railroad-themed steakhouse served customers in refurbished boxcars and cabooses, complete with heavy wooden beams, iron fixtures, and dim lantern light that made the whole place feel like the Transcontinental Express had stopped just for dinner. The concept launched in San Francisco in 1969 and expanded to roughly 100 locations by the early 80s, with a menu built around prime rib, steaks, and cocktails. The setting was the draw. You walked through an actual rail car to your table and ordered under swinging lanterns, but maintaining vintage railroad equipment as functional dining spaces cost a fortune, and novelty alone could not keep a restaurant alive once the thrill wore thin. Victoria Station filed for bankruptcy in 1986, and most locations disappeared by the early 90s. The last American outpost held on until 2017, still serving steak in a solitary railcar, decades after the rest of the line went dark. Delights proved that America was not ready for healthy fast food, not in 1981 anyway. Founded by Doug Shealy, a former Wendy's franchise owner in Norcross, Georgia, the chain served lean beef burgers on whole wheat buns, baked potatoes, fresh soups, and vegetarian sandwiches, while every other drive-thru in the country was pushing double cheeseburgers and fried everything. Investors like NFL icons Joe Montana and Herschel Walker put money behind the concept, and by 1983, the chain had expanded to over 100 locations in 19 states. Then, Shealy took the company public in '84, and the new board pushed expansion into neighborhoods where nobody was counting calories. McDonald's and Wendy's quietly added salads and baked potatoes to their own menus, swallowing Delights' entire niche. Bankruptcy hit in '86. The chain was dead by '87. Every fast casual restaurant in the country now sells exactly what Delight's was serving 4 decades too early. Beefsteak Charlie's made you a promise no modern restaurant would dare repeat. The all-you-can-eat steak, unlimited shrimp from the salad bar, and bottomless beer, wine, or sangria, all for under $9. The chain grew out of a 1976 rebrand of the bankrupt Steak and Brew by restaurateur Larry Ellman, who borrowed the name from a legendary Manhattan steakhouse dating back to 1910. By 1984, Beefsteak Charlie's had 68 locations along the East Coast, with TV commercials featuring a mustachioed mascot promising, "I'll feed you like there's no tomorrow." The all-you-can-eat model bled the company dry. By 1987, the chain had suffered $20 million in losses. An acquisition by Bombay Palace Restaurants solved nothing. The company filed for bankruptcy by 1989. 2 Manhattan holdouts survived into the '90s, before the last one closed after September 11th. The name Bonanza Steakhouse came straight from television. Dan Blocker, the 300-pound actor who played Hoss Cartwright on the NBC Western Bonanza, opened the first Bonanza steak pit in Westport, Connecticut in 1963 while he was still starring on the show. Brothers Sam and Charles Wiley purchased the chain from Blocker after 3 years. They kept him on for public appearances, and they built Bonanza into a powerhouse with 600 locations by 1989. Then, Metro Media merged Bonanza with its rival Ponderosa, and the franchisees revolted. They feared their brand would be erased. Lawsuits flew, and locations were pressured to convert. The combined chain bled money under the same mismanagement already sinking Ponderosa. The steakhouse that a television star had built from his own fame was slowly dismantled by executives who had never worked a grill. 3 locations remain in the United States today. Red Barn looked exactly like its name. The restaurants were shaped like actual barns, bright red with white trim, with a gambrel roof and a silo on the side. Between 300 and 400 locations served burgers, fried chicken, and fish through the '70s, and those barn-shaped buildings were impossible to miss from any highway. Red Barn never suffered a dramatic collapse or a famous bankruptcy. It simply vanished. Franchise agreements expired one by one through the '80s, and ownership made no serious effort to renew them. A handful of operators tried rebranding as The Farm, but that fizzled quickly. By 1988, every Red Barn was gone. No scandal, no lawsuit, no hostile takeover. It was just a chain that quietly let its own contracts run out while the buildings were torn down or repurposed. Some of those barn-shaped shells still stand along old state routes, stripped of their signs, holding insurance offices or used car lots. Gino's Hamburgers was built by a man who won football games, not burger wars, and for 2 decades it did not matter. Gino Marchetti, captain of the Baltimore Colts and widely considered one of the greatest defensive ends in NFL history, co-founded the chain in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, in 1957. By the late 1970s, Gino's had 359 locations along the East Coast and had added Kentucky Fried Chicken counters inside select restaurants through a licensing deal. In 1982, Marriott bought the entire operation and rebranded every single location as Roy Rogers. Marchetti's name came off the signs. The menu vanished. 25 years of identity erased in one corporate transaction. The last Gino's closed in 1986. Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips was named after a real person, a British actor famous for playing butlers in 1930s Hollywood, and at its peak, it had more than 800 locations, making it the largest fish and chip operation in the country. The original recipe used Atlantic cod, beer-battered and deep-fried in a style lifted straight from London. Then came the cod wars. International fishing disputes drove cod prices through the roof in the mid-'70s, and Arthur Treacher's quietly switched to cheaper pollock. Loyal customers noticed immediately, and many walked away for good. The decline stretched through the 80s. Bankruptcy followed, and the chain collapsed to almost nothing. Nathan's Famous helped bring it back in 2021 using ghost kitchens, and roughly 8 locations now operate, a remnant of the empire that once blanketed the country. Lum started with one idea nobody else had thought of: beer-steamed hot dogs. Founded in 1956 in Miami Beach, the chain turned that single gimmick into a franchise that reached over 400 locations by the early 70s. Then the owners did something no restaurant chain had attempted before or since. They used the profits to buy Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. A family hot dog restaurant purchased one of the most famous casinos on the planet. The result was predictable to everyone except the people who approved the deal. Restaurant profits were funneled into casino operations. Dining locations were neglected. The menu started chasing trends instead of sticking with the beer-steamed dogs that had made the brand famous. Lum's filed for bankruptcy in 1978, attempted to restructure, then filed again in 1982. By the mid-1980s, the chain was gone entirely. The casino survived and prospered. The hot dogs did not. Horn and Hardart did not look like any restaurant you have ever been to. Starting in Philadelphia in 1902, the company brought the automat to America, a wall of small glass compartments, each holding a single serving of food, opened by dropping nickels into a slot. No waiters, no menus, no waiting. You put your coins in, a little glass door popped open, and there was your slice of pie or bowl of macaroni. At its peak in the 50s, Horn and Hardart ran over 180 automats across New York and Philadelphia, feeding more people daily than any other restaurant in the country. The concept was fast, egalitarian, and decades ahead of the industry. As Americans moved to suburbs and drive-thrus, the automat lost its audience. The last one closed in Manhattan in 1991. It is now in the Smithsonian. Kenny Rogers. Roasters owes its survival to a sitcom, and that is not an exaggeration. The chain launched in the early 90s around the country singer's name and a menu built on wood-fired rotisserie chicken. It grew quickly, peaked, and then faded as the casual dining market got overcrowded. Every American location eventually closed. The brand would have been completely forgotten if not for a 1996 episode of Seinfeld in which Kramer becomes obsessed with the glowing red neon sign outside a Kenny Rogers Roasters across from his apartment window. That single episode cemented the name in popular culture for decades. Even people who never ate there know the restaurant because of that show. In 2008, a Malaysian firm purchased the trademarks and rebuilt the brand across Southeast Asia, where Kenny Rogers Roasters now runs hundreds of locations. The restaurant America forgot is thriving on the other side of the world, saved by a fictional New Yorker who could not look away from a sign. York Steakhouse lived inside shopping malls, and that was both its genius and its death sentence. The chain opened in Columbus, Ohio in 1966 with a cafeteria-style model. Pick your steak, your sides, and your dessert from a line, like a school lunch counter, except the food was good and the cuts were real. General Mills bought the chain and expanded it to about 200 locations across 27 states, planting nearly every one of them inside malls during the golden era of American retail. In the early 80s, they tried rebranding select locations as York's Choices, adding bakery cases and rotating specials, but the experiment failed to catch on. When the American mall began to die in the late 80s and 90s, York Steakhouse went with it. Foot traffic dropped, leases expired, and one by one the cafeteria lines went dark. A single York Steakhouse reportedly still operates in Columbus, serving steaks to customers who remember when the food court was the center of everything. Carrols was the burger chain that could not beat them, so it became them. Founded in 1960 in Syracuse, New York, as an offshoot of the Tasty Freeze Company, Carrols grew to over 150 locations across New York and Pennsylvania by the mid-70s. The signature club burger, a triple-decker with a proprietary sauce called Crisbo Royale on a sesame seed bun, built a devoted following, and some longtime fans still insist it was the inspiration for the Big Mac. But wherever Carrols opened a restaurant, Burger King would plant one right next door. Founder Herbert Slotnick eventually decided that if he could not outrun the giant, he would join it. In 1975, Carrols cut a deal to convert its locations into Burger King franchises. The club burger vanished from menus, the neon signs came down. One independently owned Carrols in Batavia, New York, held out into the 80s before finally closing. Today, the company that erased its own name is now the largest Burger King franchisee on Earth, with over 1,000 locations, none of them called Carrols. Winky's made you happy to be hungry. That was the slogan, and in Pittsburgh during the 1970s, people believed it. The chain started in the Pittsburgh area and grew to around 42 locations, selling a simple menu of burgers, fries, and shakes in bright, clean restaurants with a name that nobody forgot once they heard it. Winky's did not try to compete nationally, did not chase trends, and did not expand beyond what it could handle. It just served good, cheap fast food to the same neighborhoods every day. That was not enough. The chain filed for bankruptcy in 1982 as the major national franchises saturated the market with locations that had bigger advertising budgets and deeper supply chains. By the mid-80s, every Winky's was gone. There is no revival plan, no ghost kitchen, no nostalgia-driven comeback. Just a name that Pittsburghers of a certain age still say with a grin because any restaurant called Winky's deserved better than what it got. Don Pablo's was the Tex-Mex chain that felt like a party even on a Tuesday night. Founded in Lubbock, Texas, in 1985, the restaurants were loud, colorful, and packed with the kind of oversized platters and frozen margaritas that made you forget you were eating in a strip mall. The chain expanded fast, reaching 120 locations across the country by the late 90s, and for a decade, it was the go-to spot for birthday dinners, first dates, and any occasion that required queso. The decline was slow and unremarkable, with rising costs, a saturated casual dining market, and corporate owners who cycled through without ever finding a strategy that worked. Locations closed in waves, the menu shrank, the margaritas got smaller. The last Don Pablo's in the United States closed in 2019, and nobody made a speech about it. The chain simply ran out of reasons to exist, one empty dining room at a time. Casa Bonita is the only restaurant on this list that got saved by a cartoon. The original chain was known for an experience that had almost nothing to do with food. Cliff divers leaping into an indoor waterfall, strolling mariachi bands, a haunted cave, puppet shows, and all-you-can-eat sopapillas served in a dining room that looked like a Mexican village built inside a warehouse. Multiple locations operated through the 70s and 80s, but most closed by the 90s. The sole survivor in Lakewood, Colorado, became a cultural landmark largely because of the animated series South Park, which featured it in a famous episode. When the restaurant shut down during the pandemic and appeared doomed, South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone purchased it in 2021 for somewhere north of $3 million and spent years renovating it. Casa Bonita reopened in 2023 with upgraded food, the same cliff divers, and a waiting list that stretched for months. VIP's was the kind of 24-hour diner that truckers and third-shift workers treated as a second kitchen. Founded near Tualatin, Oregon in 1968, the chain grew to over 50 locations across the western states, most parked near freeways and open around the clock. The menu covered everything: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the kind of 2 in the morning pancakes that kept you from making worse decisions. VIPs never tried to be flashy or trendy. It was just a reliable place to eat at any hour. In 1982, the owner sold 35 locations to Denny's, reportedly prioritizing employee job security in the deal. The rest were sold off or closed within a few years, and by the end of the decade, VIPs was gone. Denny's absorbed the real estate. The name vanished. The overnight regulars found somewhere else to go. Yankee Doodle Dandy wrapped itself in the American flag and sold burgers under it. The chain leaned hard into patriotic theming, red, white, and blue decor, colonial-style signage, and a name that dared you not to smile when you said it out loud. At its peak, roughly 27 locations operated across the southern United States, serving straightforward burgers that customers still describe in nostalgic posts decades later as better than anything the national chains were offering at the time. The restaurants closed through the 1980s as the major franchises expanded into every market Yankee Doodle Dandy occupied, and the chain had neither the advertising budget nor the supply chain to fight back. No bankruptcy filing made the news. No corporate drama played out in public. The chain just disappeared, one flag-draped dining room at a time, until there was nothing left but the name. And even that belongs to no one now. Nedick's was a New York City institution before the phrase fast food even existed. The chain launched in the 1920s selling three things: orange drink, hot dogs, and donuts, from small counters that spread across Manhattan and eventually up the eastern seaboard to every major city north of Washington. By the 50s, Nedick's was everywhere in New York, a place where bankers and construction workers stood shoulder to shoulder at the same narrow counter, eating the same 15-cent hot dog. The orange drink was the signature, sweet, cold, and completely artificial, served from glass dispensers that became as iconic as the city itself. The chain could not survive the 70s. Rising rents, declining foot traffic, and competition from national burger chains squeezed Nedick's out of the neighborhoods it had served for decades. The last original locations closed in the early 80s. A brief revival in 2003 put 3 new Nedick's in Manhattan, but all closed within a few years. The orange drink machines are gone. The counters are gone. Nothing replaced them. Steve's ice cream changed dessert in America, and almost nobody remembers the name. In 1973, Steve heralded something impulsive in his ice cream shop in Somerville, Massachusetts. He crumbled a Heath bar and mixed it into a batch of homemade ice cream. Customers went wild. The idea of mixing candy, cookies, and toppings directly into ice cream had never been done commercially, and Harold's tiny shop drew lines around the block. He sold the chain in 1977, and what happened next is the real story. Dairy Queen studied the concept and created the Blizzard. Cold Stone Creamery built an entire franchise around it. Ben & Jerry's turned mix-ins into a global brand. Every ice cream chain in the country now offers some version of what Steve Harrell invented on a whim in a small shop outside Boston. The original Steve's ice cream chain was undercut by pre-packaged grocery store versions in the late 1980s and closed for good in the late 1990s. The man who changed how America eats ice cream watched his idea become a billion-dollar industry under everyone else's name. Those menus are gone. Those dining rooms are dark. Like and subscribe if you remember walking through their doors.